The door of diplomacy is closed forever. Those are not the words of a pundit sitting in a studio thousands of miles away from the conflict. Those are not the words of an anonymous source leaking information to a reporter. According to Al Jazeera's reporting, those words are attributed to Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. They landed at a moment when the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran is not winding down, but intensifying across multiple fronts simultaneously. And here is what makes that statement so dangerous. It is not just rhetoric. When you look at what has happened in the last 72 hours, the actions on both sides are matching the words in a way that should alarm every single person watching. The consequences of a diplomatic collapse in this conflict do not stay in the Middle East. They show up in the price you pay for gas. They show up in your grocery bill. They show up in the interest rate on your mortgage. They show up in the job market. They show up in the stability of the global financial system. And right now, as we speak, the two sides are not moving toward each other. They are moving apart. So let me take you through exactly what Iran is saying and what the United States is saying. I will explain why the two positions appear irreconcilable. I will cover what is happening militarily on the ground and what all of it means for the world in the days and weeks ahead. Let me start with Iran's position because it has hardened in a way that represents a significant shift. According to Al Jazeera's live updates from the conflict, Iran has formally rejected U.S. President's claims that Tehran asked for a ceasefire. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson stated that the United States entered this war due to what Iran describes as an Israeli miscalculation. Iran's foreign minister confirmed that he has had contact with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, but explicitly denied that negotiations are underway. That distinction is critical, and I need you to understand why. Contact means communication channels exist and messages can be passed. It means there is a wire between the two sides that has not been cut. Negotiations mean something fundamentally different. Negotiations mean both sides are sitting at a table, even if virtually and actively working toward terms of agreement. Iran is saying the first is happening, but the second is not. And when Araghchi says the door of diplomacy is closed forever, he is communicating to the world that Iran does not believe the current framework offers any pathway to a deal that Tehran can accept. Bloomberg reported that Iran responded to U.S. President's latest statements by saying his absurd displays will not lead to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. This is where the economic dimension collides head-on with the diplomatic collapse. According to publicly available data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, roughly one-fifth of the world's total petroleum supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. Iran controls the northern shore. And according to the Associated Press, Iran has been operating what reporters have described as a toll booth regime at the strait. They are selectively deciding which ships are allowed to pass and which are not. Bloomberg reported that U.S. President stated a ceasefire would only be possible when the Strait of Hormuz is reopened. Iran's response that the strait will not be reopened under military pressure creates a deadlock. The American precondition for ending the war is the very thing Iran is using as its primary strategic leverage, and Iran has no incentive to give up that leverage before the war ends. This is because it is the one card they hold that the entire world feels. Now let me address what U.S. President has been saying, because multiple news organizations have described his statements as contradictory. The contradictions themselves are significant. Bloomberg reported that U.S. President said the United States could leave Iran within 2 to 3 weeks. Bloomberg also reported that U.S. President envisions withdrawal within that time frame. But Bloomberg simultaneously reported that U.S. President called on allies to seize the Strait of Hormuz. This is not a statement consistent with a rapid disengagement. The New York Times reported that U.S. President berated allies while offering conflicting signals about the Iran war. They noted that he said he was considering leaving NATO and threatening Iran with additional attacks in rapid succession. Al Jazeera reported that U.S. President told allies to get their own oil and suggested the war could end in 2 to 3 weeks. Meanwhile, the military campaign on the ground shows no indication of scaling down. These mixed signals matter because they affect every actor in the conflict. Iran is trying to assess whether the United States is serious about withdrawal or escalation. Gulf states are trying to assess whether American security guarantees still hold. European allies are trying to assess whether they need to develop independent capacity to secure energy supplies. Financial markets are trying to assess whether optimism about a quick end is justified or illusory. And when the signals are this contradictory, every one of those actors is forced to plan for multiple scenarios simultaneously. This in itself generates instability. The military picture confirms that the conflict is not de-escalating. According to official statements published by U.S. Central Command on its website, Operation Epic Fury was launched on February 28, 2026. It has been running continuously since then. CENTCOM published a readout on March 31st, confirming that the CENTCOM commander visited Israel. This indicates continued high-level military coordination. CENTCOM also published a statement on March 31st, refuting media claims of U.S. strikes in Lamard, Iran. This tells you that the information environment around this conflict is contested. It shows that CENTCOM is actively managing the narrative about where strikes are and are not occurring. The USS Abraham Lincoln, designated CVN-72, continues to operate in support of the operation. B-52H Stratofortress bombers remain deployed. Multiple Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers are conducting combat operations across the Central Command area of responsibility. The human cost to the United States has been real. CENTCOM previously confirmed that all crew members of a KC-135 Stratotanker lost over Iraqi airspace on March 12th were killed. 3 F-15 fighter jets were involved in a friendly fire incident over Kuwait on March 2nd. Fortunately, all pilots were recovered safely. According to Al Jazeera's live casualty tracker, preliminary figures from multiple reporting sources are out. The death toll stands at approximately 1,937 people killed in Iran. At least 24 have died in Israel, and 13 U.S. service members have been lost. 27 people have been killed in Gulf states. Those numbers have increased since the conflict began, reflecting the ongoing intensity of operations on all sides. It shows the reality that this is not a conflict that is burning out, but one that is sustaining itself. The economic consequences continue to compound in ways that are affecting countries far from the Middle East. Bloomberg reported that Saudi Arabia's oil exports fell by 50% in March as a result of Iran's shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. 50% is an extraordinary disruption for one of the world's largest oil producers. One producer saw its exports cut in half in a single month. Bloomberg reported that gasoline at $4 per gallon is alarming American consumers. This is raising political pressure on the U.S. president's administration. Bloomberg reported that a top Gulf aluminum producer halted its smelter after an Iranian strike. This demonstrates that the conflict is now directly damaging industrial infrastructure in countries, not parties, to the fighting. Al Jazeera reported that Iranian attacks caused fires at facilities in Kuwait and Bahrain. They also killed a civilian in the United Arab Emirates. Bloomberg reported that the UAE has barred entry to some Iranian nationals as the regional war escalates. The conflict is not staying within the borders of Iran, but is spreading across the Gulf. It is generating new tensions and new economic damage with each passing day. Bloomberg reported that credit derivative trading shattered records as the war drives financial market instability. Bloomberg reported that a senior city rates executive publicly asked who pays for all this. This flags the lasting economic cost of the conflict. Bloomberg reported that the Iran war has driven steep fuel price hikes across Africa. At least one African head of state took a personal pay cut in response to the economic pressure. Bloomberg reported that Asia's LNG imports dropped by the most since 2022 as the war upended supply chains. Bloomberg reported that India slashed cooking oil imports as the conflict hit demand and supply simultaneously. Al Jazeera reported that Nepal sharply raised jet fuel prices to avoid supply disruptions. Al Jazeera reported that Russia has imposed a ban on all gasoline exports due to the Iran war. This decision has enormous implications for energy markets in Europe and Central Asia. The conflict is also expanding geographically in ways that make a quick resolution less likely. Al Jazeera reported that Israel killed 7 people in Beirut and that Hezbollah is fighting a ground invasion. The New York Times reported that Israel has issued sweeping evacuation warnings across southern Lebanon. Israeli forces have pressed some Christian and Druze leaders to expel Shiite Muslims from their towns. Al Jazeera reported that Houthis in Yemen claimed a joint missile attack on Israel. This was conducted in coordination with Iran and Hezbollah. It indicates an increasing level of coordination among Iran's regional allies. Al Jazeera reported that NATO allies are pushing back against U.S. President's demands related to the Iran war. This suggests that the international coalition supporting the operation may be fraying. In Gaza, the situation continues to generate headlines that reveal the broader dimensions of this conflict. Reuters reported that Israeli strikes killed 6 people in the Gaza Strip, despite a U.S.-brokered ceasefire. That ceasefire has been in effect for more than 5 months. Reuters reported that babies evacuated from Gaza 2 years ago were finally returned to their parents. This was a brief moment of humanity amid the ongoing violence. Reuters reported that jailed Palestinians fear execution without due process under a new Israeli law. The law makes the death penalty the default sentence for certain convictions in military courts. The United Nations stated that this law violates international law, according to Reuters. Spain's prime minister labeled it a step towards apartheid. The European Union said the decision is very concerning. These developments are happening simultaneously with the Iran war and shaping the diplomatic environment. Bloomberg published a weekend interview titled, "Israel's War with Iran Will End When U.S. President Says Stop." That framing is directly relevant to Iran's diplomatic posture. Iran may believe the war was launched for Israeli strategic interests rather than American security concerns. If Iran believes the war continues because the United States has chosen not to stop it, their refusal to negotiate makes strategic sense. You do not negotiate with a party you believe is acting as an instrument of a third party's agenda. You wait for the principal to change course, or you endure. The question of mediation remains open, but is under enormous strain. Al Jazeera previously reported that Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia have all been engaged in de-escalation. But mediation requires both parties to be willing to negotiate, and Iran's public position is that it is not. The foreign minister's distinction between contact and actual negotiations is a thin thread. Contact means the channel is not dead, but the channel carries no substantive proposals. Bloomberg reported that stocks climbed and oil slid on optimism after U.S. President's withdrawal comments. But they also reported that a massive short squeeze is distorting the market's reading of peace prospects. This means the rally may reflect technical trading dynamics rather than genuine conviction. Bloomberg reported that Jamie Dimon stated it is vital the United States ensures the Iran war is successfully completed. That statement tells you that the financial establishment is not expecting a quick exit. They are expecting a sustained commitment and are planning accordingly. The New York Times reported that placing U.S. troops in Middle East hotels may violate the laws of war. The New York Times also published an opinion piece describing U.S. President's war as perpetually ahead of schedule. This points to a pattern of optimistic timelines that consistently fail to match conditions on the ground. The 2 to 3 week withdrawal timeline may join the April 6th Hormuz deadline as another date that passes without outcome. Here is where we stand. Iran says diplomacy is finished, and the United States says the war ends when the strait reopens. Iran says the strait will not reopen under military pressure. The United States says it could leave in weeks, but simultaneously threatens more attacks. They also call on allies to seize the waterway. The military operations continue at full intensity, and the economic damage is spreading globally. Saudi oil exports have been halved, and gasoline prices are alarming American consumers. Fuel hikes are hitting Africa, and energy imports are dropping across Asia. Russia has banned gasoline exports, and industrial facilities in Gulf states are being shut down. Financial markets are swinging on every statement and counter-statement. Technical distortions make it difficult to distinguish genuine peace signals from noise. The diplomatic collapse represents the most dangerous phase of this conflict so far. Wars without diplomatic off-ramps tend to escalate and produce miscalculations. They tend to draw in additional parties and last longer than anyone initially expects. Every major conflict that lacked a functioning diplomatic track became worse before it got better. The question now is whether the contact between Araghchi and Witkoff can be expanded into something substantive. The world cannot afford for this question to go unanswered much longer. Every day the Strait of Hormuz remains disrupted, the economic damage compounds. Every day the fighting continues, the casualty toll grows. Every day the diplomatic signals remain contradictory, the risk of miscalculation increases. And every day that passes without a credible path to de-escalation, the risk of a larger conflict grows. I will continue tracking every development using verified reporting from Reuters and Bloomberg. I will use Al Jazeera, the New York Times, and official U.S. Central Command statements. If this breakdown helped you understand where the situation stands, subscribe and turn on notifications. This conflict is evolving by the hour, and the next major development could reshape everything. Stay informed and stay safe. I will see you in the next one.